Good morning and welcome to the channel and for our first ever, my first ever scheduled live on the channel here. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Glad to have you here. If you're already here and waiting, just go ahead and drop a comment there for me so I can see you're here. And absolutely feel free to ask questions. I'll try my best to get you answers as I can. But let's go ahead and get started right off with just kind of a summary of what's going on, and then we'll get into some more details as we go on. The first up, we're going to be hitting the this map right here. I just want to kind of talk about what's going on in the broad terms right now. Up here in the northeast corner near Kupiansk, we've got the Russians have still been trying to get something going up here again. The last change was a little bit of a straightened out the lines a little bit. Some open territory got captured by both sides, and it's kind of just straightened out into an even line. Good morning, Phil. Glad to have you here. So that's Kupiansk area right there. Most of the rest of the front lines up there in the northeast have been pretty much quiet. No real changes for the last week or so. The next area that's getting a little bit of activity is right near Bakhmut here. There we go. It took me just a moment here. Now, on the north end of Bakhmut, in fact, let's go ahead and circle that on the map. On the north end of Bakhmut, Russia's been managing to make just a little bit of progress towards the Ukrainian side. They're kind of been pushing the Ukrainians back just a little bit at a time. Good morning, Lucille. Glad to have you here. On the south end, the Ukrainians still have the advantage near Klishchiivka and Andriivka down there, though there is some rumblings that there could be a... Hi, Giannis, glad to have you here as well. The Russians may have pushed back over the railroad tracks a little bit on the south end. No real maps to support that yet, but just kind of a good overview of that area. Then we get down here to Avdiivka, which has been extremely busy. On the north end, the Russians have actually pushed a slightly different direction than across the railroad tracks. The last word I had on that was the railroad tracks on the north end was the Russians were continuing to push and try to make it through those lines. They have not gotten into the Avdiivka coke plant yet, and it does not look like they are going to at this point. But Russia has been working on in effectively adding more resources to this particular part of the fight. They've been dumping pretty much everything they can in there. Near Verbova, right over here, the Russians and the Ukrainians both have done basically a little push past each other around Verbova, meaning one side pushed on one side and the other one pushed on the other, and now they've kind of got everything mixed up in that area. A lot of combat going on near Verbova right now, and it's getting really, really busy. And of course, the big area that's been really active has been the Dnipro River right along in here. The last reports I had is that the Ukrainians had actually taken control of the bulk of Krinky. The other areas the other villages in this area, still active fighting, but no real major changes in that area. The Krinky situation looks like it's going to be very interesting, and if Ukraine can continue to hold that bridgehead and expand it, things get very interesting overall. And that's kind of the top-level summary. Now, I did mention the other day that over here near Kerch, there was a Russian missile boat that got, well, not necessarily destroyed. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you on board as well. There was a Russian missile boat that got destroyed, or at least heavily damaged, in the port of Kerch, not the Kerch Bridge itself. So that situation is really interesting because it shows that the Russians may not have quite the grasp on the Kerch Bridge that they think they do. They may not be as protected as they think it is. So that's a good high-level summary of what's going on. There are some specific events, though, that kind of need a little bit more information. And we've got all the news and everything else like that right off the bat. And by the way, thank you very much for joining me. I know that this is the first time I've scheduled this, so it's interesting to see that we've already got people jumping in right off the bat. So it seems that this is really working, at least right now. So let's go on to, let's start with some bad news. We'll just put it that way. A The 128th Mountain Assault Brigade was hit by a Russian missile. And the reason this is interesting, or I should say problematic, is that it happened when the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade was put on, basically on parade. They were going to have an award ceremony. And so they got everybody lined up and everybody marshaled together. And that's when the Russians attacked. They dropped a missile right on their heads. And it gets a little bit weirder from there. Now, the total the total killed is 19. That's a large number for a single unit to take, especially at a moment like this. They're still kind of piecing together what happened, but the details have been coming out. The thing is that the Russians did almost the exact same thing. They had a parade a couple of months ago. They were going to have an address by a major general or something like that. And they got all lined up. The general was late, and the Ukrainians dropped some HIMARS on him. So that should sound really familiar for you when I say that that's pretty much exactly what happened here. They could have been avoided. There was no reason to hold an award ceremony this close to the front lines. Why they did it is going to be one of those things that's going to be really questioned overall. And here's the thing. The commander of this brigade, Colonel Dmytro Lysyuk, was late for the award ceremony, scheduled for 9, postponed to 9:30. At 9:30, they lined up on his orders and waited. The Russian strike occurred at 10:10, and this colonel arrived a few minutes after. So there's going to be at least a lot of very close looking at what this colonel was actually doing. I want to, at this point in time, believe it was a genuine, honest mistake. But what I want and what the reality is are going to be two very different things. And I think that Colonel Dmytro here will be having a long conversation with the Ukrainian GRU and a whole lot of military discipline, because the questions are going to mount. Why did you hold this event? Why did you do this in the open? Why did you show up late? So that's not going to be good. It's not going to be fun. And this whole situation is a bad thing. Yeah, that's just it, fellas. I don't know. It looks very fishy. The 70-minute delay and then him showing up a few minutes after looks so bad. It could be, that the Russians just had a very good signals intelligence situation going on. They knew it was going to happen. They saw it kind of being put together, so they got the resources together to do the attack. But I don't know. It looks really bad and it looks really fishy. But they could also have suborned this colonel or the colonel's aide or a civilian that happened to be nearby, or take your pick. There's just so many options, and it's not a good thing. It just, no matter how you slice it, not a good thing. On a more positive note, however, this is a warehouse in Sadovo. Now, Sadovo, as I recall, let me just pop over to the map, or is actually right here on the very bottom edge of the Ukraine map. To put that into perspective, this position is literally on the Russian border. It's right there. I mean, a couple of about another mile or so to the east, it would be inside Russia. And this supply warehouse is what was, well, let's just say it was what went up in smoke. Now, the reason I say it that way is because the Russians have declared that this was not a Ukrainian missile. It was, in fact, an electrical short that got out of control, shorted out, caused a fire, and started triggering the explosives to go off. So, depending on who you want to believe for today, I would say that either if their electrical shorts are doing this much damage, they probably need to work on their circuit breakers, their electrical safety, and that type of thing. or they need to really work on their missile defense, because let's cut to the chase. If this is the results of a short, they really, I guess the question is, which is worse? Is it worse for Russia to be incompetent in wiring an electrical panel, or worse for Russia to have fallen victim to a Ukrainian missile? Of course, that brings up a third option. Was it sabotage? I think there is a better than average possibility that it was sabotage. So here's what Supernova Plus had to say about it. Reports from the field is that there was no missile. It was just wiring. And the building contained 10 ATGM missiles, a grad package, that would be one of those big missile launcher, all the missiles for it, and a small number of, it doesn't say, I don't even understand that. So there was some also reports that there were potentially helicopters involved. But at this point, we have no proof of that. We just know that something went kablooey over there in Sadovo. Overall, though, the big thing to be watching here is that this map right here, that Herr Doctor 8, whoever he is, I actually got this through watching Randy Mott, who is a former infantry officer. So this is the situation for Russian supply lines. You can see over here is where that attack happened, but it's not that far for Ukraine to lob a missile from their front lines to hit here, or to hit Mariupol, or to hit Berdyansk. They've got them right there. These are the rail lines that are across the south right there. That's their way of getting their supplies across. So pretty much the Russian supply chain is under basically attack from the Ukrainians, especially if they're relying on these rail lines, which tend to have schedules, and tend to have not only schedules, but tend to have fixed routes. So you can't exactly make a change to how those things run. Now, Russia is currently working on a south railroad line and a south highway across the very south along here to get over to Crimea. But again, if the Ukrainians are able to hit Sadovo, they can easily hit any rail line or roadway that would be run along the south end as well. So that's kind of the situation, cope cages for trains. I would not be surprised. Russia is one of the ones that had armored trains for years, so I could absolutely see them pulling it off, and it would be really entertaining if they did, honestly. But that's the situation on the that warehouse. And now we're going to go into kind of what's going on in Ukraine news-wise. But before we do, is there any questions immediately that you guys want to talk about while we've got a minute or two? I'll take a moment to take a drink of water. Thankfully, the water that I spilled all falls below the camera line there, so you won't see that my tie is now wet. So pretty funny. Anyway, let's move on to the Ukraine news. Wrong button there. Let's try this button instead. There we go. All right, the Ukraine news. Odessa pretty much took a huge amount of hits overnight, to be the night before last. For instance, the Russians managed to damage an art museum, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's really, let's see, let me back up here and find the other ones here. They damaged a museum and a couple of high-rise residential buildings. There is a report that they also managed to hit critical infrastructure somehow or another, but the only damage was the outbuildings and administration buildings. So at this point, Russians are using their high-end missiles. Yes, exactly. You guys can picture the wet tie now. but really, the Russians are using their high precision missiles to hit things like that are entirely civilian in nature, and then declare that they have successfully managed to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure each and every time. Some more kind of video of the shattered windows and just the damage to the streets and the homes and the businesses that are entirely not military related here. So Odessa took it in the shorts again, effectively. With a lot of the debate between Zaluzny and Zelensky and the international community, the whole strategy at this point is being thought and adjusted for the changing conditions. And President Zelensky says they're looking for plans to move forward faster. A long war benefits Russia tremendously. That means their lower rate production can be successfully used to basically to fill in the gaps in their attack and defense capabilities. If they can afford to wait more time, they can afford to put together more missiles, more tanks, more everything, train more soldiers. So a long war benefits Russia in a lot of ways. So they're trying to shift the strategy to gain an upper hand in the war. As President Zelensky says, our military is coming up with different plans, with different operations, in order to move forward faster and to strike the Russian Federation unexpectedly. But barehanded, this is impossible to do without weapons, without proper weapons. There are also some talk about fatigue with the war as things have kind of dragged on, but Ukraine is still, he says, motivated and capable and way more motivated than Russia to fight this war. In Kyiv, the Soviet star was removed from the obelisk on Halitska Square, or formerly Victory Square. Once again, Ukraine is working on de-Russifying their culture. They're removing the icons that the Soviets put there for all those years. And in other news, Ukraine is going away from conscription. They'll be going to voluntary contract military service. This is an interesting change in the nature of the war. Ukraine has never had a shortage of volunteers to come forward. In fact, often the shortages have been the ability to train, equip, and otherwise provision new divisions, not a shortage of recruits. But this does indicate that the overall situation is gradually changing in Ukraine to allow this type of contract military service as opposed to a draft or compulsory military service. That will be a lot of intensive military training for citizens of military age, and it could be that a lot of this is going to be training the people, but not requiring them to go into military service immediately, or to allow them to contract as needed. This also makes it more capable of their military being advanced and actually having career soldiers, as opposed to just, Bob the baker decides that he needs to go and help out the military. Well, maybe Bob the baker can become, tactician baker or tactician Bob, or the military logistics professional Bob, really making them into career military personnel. Interesting picture shared by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. This is a bridging vehicle, and you don't need bridging vehicles by and large behind the lines. Yeah, you can have some situations where you'll need to temporarily replace a bridge, but bridging vehicles are much more effective when used to move your forces to the front to actually prosecute the war. And I suspect they're going to be needing these over, say, near Dnipro River in the Kherson region. Just thought it was interesting. Ukraine's winter war plans appear to be large-scale drone attacks on Russia. This is effectively they're trying to stop Russia from having the advantage in the wintertime where they're on defense by carrying the battle to Russia using drones. They'll be hitting, of course, military targets and situations that are behind the lines, taking out their logistics, taking out their ability to produce and manufacture, taking out their vital war industry. Using the winter as the best time to do it. Pause here. Lucille says, we shouldn't give up just because we're tired of it. Preserving liberty takes patience as well as weapons and work and sacrifice. Wish it was easy. It's not. Very true. Thank you very much. Now, I would play this normally, but it's in news footage here. The President Zelensky had an interview with NBC News talking about the situation in Ukraine, and whether they were. And one of the questions was what it would take to get them to negotiate this away. And he says Ukraine is not ready to give up its freedom to this. I'm going to replace the word dang terrorist Putin. Like this. That's why we are fighting. And I continue to believe that Ukraine is taking the principled position here. If it was all about the money, Vladimir Zelensky could have hopped on a U.S. Plane, been in a third country, been a ruler in exile, and been basically set for life with money flowing in and donations and speaking circuits and book deals. He could have easily ridden the gravy train for life. So I cannot believe that the motivation that he has, I cannot believe that President Zelensky's motivation is money. Therefore, the motivation from everything I've seen is that it is a matter of principle and freedom. He's not willing to give up the freedom of Ukraine in exchange for monetary gain. And therefore, he wants to fight the whole way. There's people there that are waiting to be liberated. That's my takeaway from his speech. And what kind of related here? Ukroboronprom, which I'm certain I'm butchering the name of because every time I look at it, I can't seem to get the pronunciation right. They've launched mass production of kamikaze drones with a flight range of 1,000 kilometers. That's going to be what's going to really, make Russia suffer this winter. That's what's going to be making their military factories that are anywhere near Ukraine suffer for the results. They're going to be hitting those every day and on a regular basis with mass production of these types of kamikaze drones. And that's kind of the news out of Ukraine for a moment here. Brief pauses to gather thoughts and kind of move along here. Phil, there is a price to freedom. One of them is eternal vigilance. Absolutely. And I think that there's too many people who believe that just because it's not happening to your country, it doesn't matter what happens to your buddies next door. I have a lot of opinions about the effectiveness of U.S. aid, for instance, to Ukraine. But if the U.S. pulls out and no longer supports Ukraine, one part of me says that the EU would fill the gap to the best of their ability, but that it would cause a long, bloody, painful war as a result. Another part of me says that Ukraine, even if they were taken in full, would have a bloody, awful insurgency constantly happening for decades. And the result, it would be a war, basically a war that never ended. The U.S., if they turn their back on Ukraine at this point, will have effectively shown the world that if you're just not important enough to us, whatever we agreed to, our support is worth nothing. So why would NATO rely on the U.S. to come to their aid? Why would the UK think that the U.S. is going to come and help them? Why would France? Why would an African nation? Why would Taiwan? Why would South Korea think that just because the U.S. gave assistance and gave promises that they would do so when the chips are down and the real fighting starts. So I think there's real cost to giving up on Ukraine for the U.S. Let's move on into Russia's news. As winter approaches, according to the Defense Intelligence update from the UK, eyewitness accounts from deployed Russian troops in Ukraine suggest that soldiers' age-old battle against the elements remains a major preoccupation for Russia's army. They're wet from head to toe. They're having to fight for weeks on end, and that they can't start fires because it would alert the Ukrainians. The maintaining of a decent level of personal comfort and sound administration in defensive positions is challenging for any army. However, the evidence suggests a generally very poor level on enforcement of basic field administration amongst Russian forces. This is likely caused by a deficit in motivated junior commanders as well as variable logistical support. And this is a situation where Russians are not getting the right equipment to the front lines for winter warfare. They aren't able to deal with the wetter conditions like the Ukrainians are, who are getting support from Western sources to help them to have the right winter-grade equipment, the right hardware to carry out their operations. They're being, not only that, the Ukrainians are being industrious, building better defensive positions that have more creature comforts than the Russians are able to carry out. So it's a matter of motivation and leadership, both of which Russia is lacking in at this point in time. Russia's basically saying they want to turn the Crimea Bridge into a toll road. They say they'll never be able to build such a number of roads that everyone from Russia would come to Crimea, park and relax without causing traffic jams. And they're going to balance that demand by introducing paid restrictions, i.e. make it into a toll bridge. I think that maybe they might be looking to make some money off this bridge before they have to repair it again. Or it's destroyed fully. Russia is negotiating the construction of a military base in Libya. I'm pointing this out for a couple of reasons. This allows Russia to monitor the entire European Union, and they're also working on establishing a base in Sudan, which would give it access to the Suez Canal and the Arabian Peninsula. This really indicates that Russia's reach is getting bigger, and the bigger that reach gets, the harder it's going to be to contain. Therefore, we need to be watching carefully what we're letting Russia get away with. Pause here to look at the comments. We don't just send money to Ukraine, says Jerry. We send weapons from our supplies, and we buy more weapons from our industry. So this helps our economy. Absolutely true. Lucille says the U.S. needs to be careful what it promises, but whatever it promises as a nation, we need to deliver. As in doing what we say and meaning what we say and doing it. Bill asks, will a toll bridge ease the economic struggle? Not significantly. It's just one more way to extract money from a populace that's already got a relatively restricted ability to bring in additional capital. It's just another form of taxation in the end. And that's a good spot right there. Let's go ahead and move on to the next news item. In occupied Enerhodar, according to Jason J. Smart, where the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is located, the electricity went out after a series of bright flashes, almost a strobe light effect. No additional reports on this just yet. This was from yesterday. I don't think it's directly related to the nuclear power plant. I think it's just an electrical substation, which, when it has high enough power load on it, can result in a huge amount of strobing light as the electricity arcs from one position to another. I've seen something similar to that happen here in the U.S. It was actually just a single transformer and a relatively low voltage line where literally the electricity was causing a plasma arc in the air, and it was just flashing repeatedly over and over and over. So probably just some electrical substation has had a severe fault, and that caused the power to go out in Herhodar. Ukrainian hackers managed to take control of TV networks in Crimea with the message, send the Ukrainian forces the coordinates of Russian military positions. Liberation is coming. Interesting that they're managing to get this onto Crimean television, which should tell you there's a couple of possibilities here. Either their television networks are entirely vulnerable to remote attack, or there's some resources on the inside helping them out. Follow up from the attack on the Kerch port or Kerch naval yard. We can actually see in the left-hand picture at least 2 missile strikes on this Zorakert class guided missile cruiser, or frigate, I think is actually the correct class. It took a significant amount of damage. They've had to bring a crane in to help stabilize the situation. And really, the whole thing we're finally seeing the proof of what that missile attack finally did as well. There's also some damage dockside as well. It proves that no matter where they are in Crimea, the Ukrainians are able to reach out and touch them. Also shows that since this is close to the Kerch Strait Bridge, that bridge may be more vulnerable than they think it is. And if they had the right hardware to take out a bridge, say Taurus missiles, it could be a bridge no longer. This is one of the guidance kits that are attached to a Russian Fab 1500 bomb. This one separated in midair and therefore turned the glide bomb into a dumb bomb. But it's interesting to see their hardware equivalent of the American stuff. It's bolted to the bottom, and instead of the top, as I recall, the Americans do. And then, of course, once they release, the wings pop out, and it glides to its destination. It gives it a lot more range that way, and a lot more precision. But it also can fail on a regular basis, which, as we see here. According to the Defense Intelligence of the UK, inflation has risen to 6% in Russia as of September 2023, up from 5.3% in August. And this is rises in consumer prices such as food and fuel. Fuel's an interesting one. Russia is flush with oil. They should be able to refine as much fuel as they ever needed. But it seems like their economic situation is kind of weird with fuel right now, and they're not able to both refine the amount of fuel they need and get it to the stations at the same time. And there's a lot of things going on there. This is due to increasing demand, partially due to large increases in defense spending, along with the continued pressures of a tightening labor market. And the Russian economy is likely at risk of overheating. This is likely to ensure inflation in Russia in 2024 remains above the target rate of 4%, and is highly likely to erode in real terms government spending, particularly in areas such as social care with below inflation spending rates rises. Russia's economy is not necessarily falling apart, but they're reorienting entirely to war production. Backing up to the comments, Douglas says buying replacement weapons will upgrade U.S. weapons stock, but it doesn't help the economy. Money spent on weapons could always be better spent for non-military benefits. Phil says, I love a good troll, but I believe Phil was referring to the television situation in Crimea, because that's when his comment popped up. Jerry says they are showing how accurate their missiles are and their defenses are weak. Absolutely. And Douglas says, not trolling, just respectfully pushing back. Douglas, I just want to address that really quick here as a quick commentary. The buying the replacement weapons still puts Americans to work and still helps out by spreading the money around the economy and getting more economic activity. Is it an overall net increase in the size of the economy? Probably not. You need to bring in more money than you're spending. Right now, though, the movement of the money around the economy itself helps keep the economy moving, helps people get back to work. Does it have an outright benefit to the, say, base GDP of the nation? Possibly not. But that depends on the nature of the activity that happens around it. So there's benefits and there's detriments, upsides and downsides. Either way, I would rather an economist actually address that more than I do, but that's my impression from the knowledge I have. Russia has put up a couple of volunteer units out of the occupied territories. Only 7% of those that are in those volunteer units actually come from the occupied territories of Ukraine. The rest are mercenaries hired from other parts of Russia, which indicates that, hey, maybe the Russians aren't as popular in the occupied territories as they think they are. All right, brief pause before we go to a very short international section. All right, I'm back. Air quotes are my favorite form of sarcasm. It makes me so much fun to use them. It's so much fun to use them. I love using air quotes. Lucille says differences of opinion are okay. That's how we're different from tyrannies. Absolutely. The differences of opinion over in Russia are very well, shall we say, managed. A controlled opposition, if you will, providing the illusion of opposition with none of the actual side effects thereof. All right, so let's move on to international and then into some of the information off the front lines. Front lines is a little different than normal today, but I'll address that in a moment. From Howard Buffett, we are asking Ukraine to fight this war in a way that we would not fight it ourselves. There are certainly cruel and immoral aspects to the West's timid support of Ukraine, as the country sacrifices itself by fighting evil on behalf of the free world. I do think that that Ukraine is currently standing right there on the front lines and preventing a broader war in Europe. And I think that we all should be providing the assistance to get that taken care of as fast as possible. The thing is, it's already spread. So now there's the situation in Israel. There was a situation in Armenia, Azerbaijan. There's situations in Africa that are going on as we speak. There's situations in Southeast Asia. All of these areas are exploding because in the initial point, the initial spot that we're at, nobody made the real effort to stop it from happening. Let's move on to front lines. Now, today, most of the front lines information is coming from the Institute for the Study of War. And that's because a lot of the ISW, or the people have got a lot of the details today that are going to be the ones that are going to be the ones we're discussing. All the rest of the maps and sources were really quiet this weekend, but ISW is coming through with giving us some good information. Geolocated footage posted on November 4th indicates that Ukrainian forces made limited gains northwest of Verbova. Additional footage shows that Russian forces made a limited advance towards a trench line west of Verbova. So let me see if I can bring this up and get it to where I can see it well. Oh, yes, very nice. Verbova over here, we're talking literally that the Russians and the Ukrainians are going past each other. The Ukrainians made progress up here, and the Russians made progress down here. It'll be interesting to see if one of them manages to turn into the other and create a flanking attack out of it and cut it off at the knees. But interesting that these things are happening. It's active on these front lines. There's just no way around it. There is constant battle going on, no matter how you look at it. Let's see, next one. This is discussing the situation in the Kherson area here. Now let's go ahead and bring up Let's see. Yes. Okay, let's bring up this map here, which should give us a pretty good overview of the situation here. Yeah, that should do well. What we're seeing primarily in my eyes here is improvements of the situation for Ukraine near Kozachi-Lahari. We're seeing more indications of Ukrainian forces right along this edge here. In addition, we're seeing they've already advanced into Krinky, which is right along in here, and we can see the area of control, the gray area, has expanded considerably, indicating that the Russians are not able to effectively engage inside Krinky itself at this point in time. So, and it's all this situation is indicating further efforts by Ukraine to make serious work on the south of the Dnipro River. We can see here that there's indications that they have managed to, wrong color. We can see here there's additional indications that they've managed to advance to the outskirts of Puima and Pushkinivka, not all the way to Podstepna, but this line here indicates that the Ukrainians are actually doing a broad front across the Dnipro River and currently effectively pushing the Russians back. Again, these are small scale offensive items. They're not at this point in time like there's thousands of men that have crossed the Dnipro and are now making serious headway. But each little bit they do pushes the Russians farther back from the river, provides more of an opening for the Ukrainians to put the to build bridges to get across that river. That is how it's going to be done, is a little piece at a time, but they're making that progress. Russian forces continued offensive operations near Avdiivka and southwest of Donetsk city, but did not make any confirmed advances, and they continue to suffer heavy losses near Avdiivka. There's no real big changes here. Kind of see what's going on. The big change that I noticed was up at the north end up here. You can kind of see this little hump right here that started to appear. That indicates that the Russians have found that they're not able to push directly across the railroad tracks and are now working to maneuver around the side of the defenders there, encircle them farther north and west. And the situation here at Bakhmut continues to be pretty tenuous. I'm going to move down here to the map and we can take a closer look at. There was a slight, like I said, mentioned, a slight advance of the Russians near Klashivka, where the Ukrainians have been making serious headway in the last few weeks. That would be down over here. The situation right here north of Bakhmut, though, is starting to be a bit concerning. The Russians continue to make little nibbles and bites at the territory there, gradually progressing further forward. That may indicate that the Ukrainians are running a little low on forces to reinforce that area. Either they're going to have to get some reserves in there to stop that little bit of nibbling and biting up there, or they're going to have to they're going to have to do something to change the situation, or it's going to be this gradual loss day after day after day. Let me see. This is what? This is Western Zaporizhia. I think this is the same information I just addressed. Okay, yep, it is. And, okay, there we go. Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces struck Skadovsk-occupied Kherson Oblast on the night of November 4th through 5th. Again, this is just attriting the behind the front lines. This is attriting the forces behind the front lines on the Russian side, taking out their ability to resupply their troops and wage their war. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause for just a moment here. By the way, if you want to start getting any other questions you want to discuss into the chat, I will be watching for them and we can address them on the fly. we're about to get into the kind of interesting extras here. There's a few items, and I think that you'll find them interesting. In the meantime, let's go ahead and go through everything here. Have you noticed that Russia is often at the center of the conflicts elsewhere? Strangely enough, they seem to have their finger pretty much anywhere there is a conflict going on. China's trying to take that over, but hasn't managed to pull it off just yet. But yeah, Russia's got their fingers in everything bad. Let's see, Phil says, involved or hanging around the perimeter, egging one side on. Yep, for decades. And yes, Phil, it did actually make their arms sales for 75 years. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and go into the extras. If you have questions for me to talk about afterwards, put them in there, or we're going to just, if there aren't any questions, we'll go ahead and just finish up the stream right after this. So let's go ahead and move forward with the extras. Gary Kasparov stated, the fight against authoritarianism is like a game of chess. It's black or white, but this is not like chess. There is no draw. You win or you lose. And that is, I thought it was a very great quote. There is not going to be a draw. Even if there's a ceasefire, even if there is a temporary truce, the powers of authoritarianism, the powers of dictatorship always want more. One of the things I noticed the other day was that I think it was Scott Adams or somebody else I noticed on Twitter, and I don't remember who. No, it was Vivek Ramaswamy. That's who it was. Stated that that all sides were working for their self-interest, and if you played to that, you could stop the war in Ukraine. But the problem with that is that fundamentally, Russia's self-interest is served by expanding their empire. They gain more of the Western industry. They gain more of the Western educated people. The more they expand their influence, they get more money, more wealth, more resources, more capabilities. Everything they do in their self-interest, as of this point in time, involves expanding Russia, not sticking with the lines as they were in 1991. So everything that every suggestion that comes down to playing to Russia's self-interest can only be done if Russia's self-interest is harmed by that expansion. As in, they have to pay so heavily for the fight in Ukraine, pay so heavily for taking over the Baltics or taking over Poland or any of these things. They have to pay so heavily that it is no longer worth it to them. It takes it out of their self-interest. As long as the costs are lower than their willingness to pay, then the war will continue to drag on and on and on. So, no, any argument that starts with playing to their self-interest automatically fails in every respect at this point in time, which really, honestly, just shows the lack of international chops a lot of these people have right now. When they say it's so easy to stop this war in Ukraine, it's not. Because it assumes that Ukraine does not start from a moral position, a position of principles, that it starts only with raw, craven greed. And if that's where it starts for Ukraine, they would have stopped fighting a long time ago. That simple. Therefore, Ukraine is fighting from a position of principle, not of profit, in my opinion. Kind of a side note here, China has apparently been able to utilize industrial espionage to the point that they have successfully implemented reusable rocket designs and data that they stole from Elon's SpaceX. this just indicates that this space race has now gotten extremely hot. That the more advanced China's space industry becomes, the more problematic it's going to be to stop them from taking aggressive action elsewhere. Just pointing it out. Every time we turn around, Russia is making another nuclear threat. Here's a video they produced, an animation showing Russian nuclear missiles falling on U.S. cities like New York and San Francisco. The truth is that every time we turn around, the more they threaten, the more the West collapses. So more threats gets them more of what they want. Countering this requires the West to be strong. Countering this requires the West to provide a strong and powerful punch back against this type of propaganda, because that's what it is. And if you were paying attention last night, across Ukraine, the northern lights were in full display. The aurora was a bright pink sky across many regions of Ukraine. In fact, across Russia, there was a lot of it shown as well. So all across the that area of Europe and Asia, they had these beautiful light displays going on. And I thought that was just really pretty to see some of these pictures. That beautiful red or even dark pink glow must have been something to see for those people in those areas. Just some beautiful pictures. Of course, it could also have some other meanings behind it as well. And that is everything for today. I'm watching for questions at this point. I don't see any so far. But I will just quickly scan through the comments here. Phil says, if Russia doesn't expand, they have to develop things themselves, playing catch up all the way. Absolutely. They're maybe not lazy, he says, but not creative and energetic. Lucille says, Ramaswamy is wrong. True freedom fighters and countries fight for a greater cause. And Phil says that Elon is a genius, gives tech away and forever get government grants to outdo that tech. So yeah, that's the overall situation we got right there. That whole situation with Elon Musk, I've said it a couple of times that he believes that being capable in making rockets and making cars means that he has insights into international relationships and other nations and other peoples. I cannot get on board with that. That'd be like me saying I understand, France enough to go run for president over there, or understanding African nations well enough to just wander in there and start dictating terms. It's not how it works. You got to get to know the people. You got to get to know the personalities. You have to understand the geopolitics in every aspect. Otherwise, you end up with just hot takes that don't make a lick of sense. All right, last call for questions. Not seeing any so far. But I do want to say thank you, everybody, for joining me today. It was a really great stream, and I do appreciate it. If you found out something new and want to make sure other people know about it, you know where to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you're not a regular subscriber here. If you found the scheduled stream really worked out for you as well, absolutely comment about that to keep me informed. I may not be able to do this every time. But at least when I can, having it scheduled, at least let you guys know it's coming. And everything else, it looks like, I think we're pretty much at the end here. From Phil, thought is required, not attitude and cash. That is absolutely correct. Understanding the situation requires far more than just thinking you can throw money at the problem and hope it goes away. And yes, it is good seeing everyone again. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I hope the update really helped you out for today. Share it if you think somebody else can benefit from it. Every comment was appreciated. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next stream.